Good morning, my friends. We're continuing with the Ananda way of life, guidelines of conduct for Ananda members based on the Sevaka order. And we're up to Article 8 of 16 articles. I always have to check, but I believe it's 16. Yes, it's 16. And this one is called Work is Service. So what we're doing with this pamphlet, well, what we're doing first is we're going to pray, and then we'll talk about what we're doing here. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Help us to feel your living presence, constantly reminding us that this world is just a play of light and shadow, that we are tourists through time and space, spending an incarnation working through the karmic lessons that we brought with us, striving ever to be more perfect instruments of your love, to live in your light, to share your light with all. We are your children. Bless us and guide us. Om. Peace. Amen. I was reflecting on something that I was saying yesterday, talking about children and it being a work in progress, marriage and children being works in progress in our handful of existing communities. The thrust of this series of talks has been from the example of a full functioning residential community, what threads can be drawn out that are of value to the vast majority of people who do not yet live in intentional communities. Then we balance against that, that sort of, we have a handful of people. Swami put the number at 1,000 at one point, that, things come and swell and shrink. But that would be the most of the entire Ananda world. 1,000 people live in residential community, and considering the billions on the planet, you can see that's very few, and even the tens of thousands of people who are touched and dedicated to Ananda's teaching, it's still very few. But it's from a solid, definite, committed core that new ideas really spread into the world. And we have this very interesting commission from Master himself, where he says that these intentional communities of this style will be the living pattern, the lifestyle pattern of the future. And I mentioned this yesterday, that the idea of communities will spread like wildfire. Now, we're talking a very long-range movement here. If you think of the incarnation of other avatars in the West, and of course that means Jesus, and you think what the picture was, even for several hundred years after his passing, before the power that was planted there really began to come forth. Now, Jesus was born in Kali Yuga, descending, 500 years more of descending Kali Yuga before the corner turned and we started up the expansive side of the Yuga cycle, which is what we're in now. But still, the image of life that Master projects through these communities is by no means the popular way of living at this point. But in many ways, that lack of universal acceptance and commitment is a greater incentive for those of us who are drawn and do understand this lifestyle to be very committed and attentive to what we are doing, and very willing to use our creative powers of visualization to see a potential that isn't already in front of us. So when I was talking about children in marriage especially, that's almost like that's the fulcrum edge of this big change, because religious communities have existed for a very long time in various forms, but it's incorporating that personal relationship of marriage, and then a much bigger step even further is in committing ourselves to raising children in this context. And what does it look like? When self-realization is the goal, what does it look like? And that's the question that I have asked myself all these years. With self-realization, when it's understood that self-realization is the goal in life, what does everything else look like? Because there's no existing model in our society that says self-realization is the goal, therefore. And this is exactly what Master's working on. So now we're up to the question of work. And once again, as I was saying, within a residential community, and in this case work especially, is related to Ananda village, where I live in an urban community where many vocations are easily accessible from residents in the community. We haven't made the same effort that's been made at the village in order to provide what Master called home, job, and church in one place. Swami made that community deliberately somewhat isolated so that we would be forced to become self-sufficient in many ways. And at that time, there was no internet. So the idea of working with some established economic entity from a remote location, which has now actually become a dynamic option for many people. Nobody had even imagined such a thing. Whatever ways of supporting ourselves we had to have access to them right there. Plus we were trying to build, and still are trying to build, where you walk into it and it's a self-sustaining society. It doesn't have to be self-sufficient. We've never made the effort to be self-sufficient in the sense of making everything ourselves. Some communities come to that, and they're going to make everything themselves. They're going to import nothing. We have not been that radical. We're perfectly willing to drive to the nearby hardware store, the nearby town, and buy what we need that we can't manufacture ourselves. But self-sufficient, so that we can live within our own world, choose our own companions, serve God in our own way, and sustain ourselves. Well, it's a clear word. So now Article 8 is called Work as Service. So now we're talking about vocation. How do we earn our living? Because another thing that Ananda has chosen is not to try to make a separate economic system. Some intentional communities are formed around economic radicalism, a communist model, a moneyless model, a work exchange model. And those are all interesting experiments. Swamiji felt it would distract us from our true intention. Our true intention in having a community is to create a life, the most supportive life for spiritual practice and spiritual progress. And the social implications of what we are doing are a byproduct of having the spiritual core center. Some intentional communities start with the social implications, whether it's a new concept of family, as I was saying, or a new concept of work, a new concept of economics, as a central focus. Our central focus is God, and then a lot of other interesting things have come along with that. So our concept of work is that work is service. All Ananda members should view whatever gainful employment they seek as a service, never merely as work. Okay, what he means by that quite simply is many people take a job because they need the money. And they think of their job as the way they're going to get money. And so in the first sentence, Swami wants us to realize if we're going to spend all this energy and creativity and willpower on this aspect of our life, we need to elevate it so that it supports and facilitates our self-realization. So therefore, work is not for its own sake. Work is for serving in whatever way may be available to us. And of course, it depends on the work. But we need to look at it not as what I'm going to get from this, which is I'm doing this work so I can get my paycheck, as I'm doing this work because I can serve. I can serve my fellow workers. I can serve my boss. I can serve my employees. I can serve the world by providing something that's useful to the world. It just depends on what work we're doing, how we are able to frame it. The mere thought of hard work, indeed, often drains a person's energies, where joyful, willing service opens inner floodgates to a boundless supply of energy. So, if my goal in life is to manifest one of the 8 aspects of God, work takes an enormous amount of my energy. Do I want to just have my work be something I drudge through, that I dread, that the hard work of it is tiresome? Or do I want to be filled with divine light? And Swami is writing here that the very thought that our work is service makes us much more joyous and willing to do it than that it's drudgery that I do because I have to. It's amazing how much a change of attitude will change our whole experience. Expansive service, moreover, in God's name, is much more spiritually regenerating than that constricted service motivated by human feelings, which people commonly offer to the few whom they consider their own. So now he's even going with the concept of service. There's expansive and narrow ways to think about service. A person can think, I'm doing my job because I get money, and that allows me to serve and support my children, which of course is a very nice thing and a very high motivation. And many, many people in the world motivate themselves out of their desire to take care of their children. So in and of itself, it's by no means negative. But here's one of the secrets that we begin to understand when we begin to see life from a more expansive point of view. Parents are willing to give mightily to their children because they have such a deep sense of love for those children and a desire to take care of them. This is implanted in us by God, and it is our own nature. So I will put out all this energy because I know that it's going to benefit my children. But what happens because of that motivation is that one puts out a lot of positive, often very joyous energy without any sense of resentment or drudgery, because the power of love has inspired me to do it with joy. But what Divine Mother is trying to teach us is that the power of love enables us to do everything with joy, and loving and acting joyfully are 2 of the manifestations of the divine. And we begin to discover that what we're really enjoying, motivated by taking care of our children, but what we're really enjoying is the joyful output of energy and the expansive feeling of love. And then we begin to move back from the specific expression to the expression itself, to the state of consciousness that inspires us to act in that particular way. I had this conversation with Swami, which bears on this discussion, even though it's not per se about work. When I was, during my first 10 years at Ananda, there were 2 women in my life that I spent a lot of time with because both of them and I spent a lot of time with Swami. So the 3 of us were often together with Swamiji. And as karma would have it, one of those women was a soul sister from so many lifetimes. The bond between us was effortlessly harmonious, and the friendship was the greatest joy of my life. The other woman was also a soul sister, but a soul sister in which our relationship had gotten twisted. From, if you trace these things back, usually the people that you now have great antagonism with, at some point in the karmic cycle of incarnations, you are probably very close to each other, because you become close, you have desires, those desires are thwarted desire leads to anger leads to revenge leads to negative feeling feeds upon itself, and I believe that's the cycle that I went through. So at this stage, in this incarnation, we were enemies. We were civilized to each other, but it took almost nothing to spark a controversy between us. And Swamiji, sort of had to constantly be trying to make peace between us. And we tried. We were not proud of the fact that we couldn't get along. It was a source of great suffering for both of us. But the uncontrollable karmic impulse took many years to tame, and by the grace of God, we did tame it. But during those years, it was very difficult. So at one point in all of that, and I'm putting it in front of you because it was a really serious issue. It was at that time, it was the heaviest, hardest karma that I had to face. I had this. I'd heard about likes and dislikes and remaining even-minded and cheerful, and not getting too excited, even in a positive way. I sort of had all these ideas roiling around in my head. So it occurred to me that part of the problem was not that I didn't get along with this one, but that I loved this one too much. And because I loved this one so much, the contrast with my feelings over here was so great. So I had what I will now call harebrained idea that I should not be so, I should not give my heart so freely to my soul sister over here, because if I brought that down a little bit, it would be a little closer to my negative feelings over here. I had it all worked out. And this is one of those times when Swami was very direct with me. And I presented to him, when my unfortunate friendship wasn't present, I presented this idea to him. I said, the problem is not that I dislike so-and-so, it's that I love this one too much. So I'm going to try to love this one less. Swami said to me, I believe what he said to me was, that's a really stupid idea. If it wasn't precisely those words, it was so close to them. He said that a couple of times to a few people. That's a really stupid idea, or that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. So there we were. And I thought it was a good idea. It seemed philosophically sound to me. But I was more enthusiastic than I was intelligent in those days. But Swami's answer, and that long introduction is very important, because here was Swami's answer. A great, loving, spontaneously effortless friendship and love that has been given to you here is to teach you what you are capable of, and inspire you to love everyone to that degree. So obvious. It's like this is the apex at the moment of what you're able to do, and it's telling you this is the stuff of which you are made. This is who you should become. Rather than repudiating that, you should rise to that. Now, why? Because the feeling of joy was so magnificent that it told me what I wanted for my life. And it isn't the apex of which the human being is capable. It was just an example to me. So now we have our children, we have our romantic partner, and something of another order of magnitude suddenly becomes possible. So what most people decide is, I have to have this kind of romantic partner. Children are the best thing in the world, but it's not the children and the romantic partner that we're enjoying. It's that they allow us to express something much more noble, much greater, much more self-transcending than we habitually put out. And that's why it's given to us. Now, we can take that very thing which is intended to be expansive, and we can use it to contract us further. It's like, now I'll take care of my wife, I'll take care of my husband, I'll take care of my son, I'll take care of my daughter. And instead of having it be an opening to expansive generosity of heart, we become the gatekeeper. We put a fence around this. Well, yes, it's better than being totally selfish. There's no question about it. But when we think about our life as a road to self-realization, and even more powerfully, Swamiji has said that everything in the material world is a symbol of a higher reality. And it's the higher reality which is really the meaning. And when I first heard him say that, which was some years into the path, it was sort of like your mind goes a little bit on tilt. Because this world, the material world that we see so easily with our physical eyes, seems so big and well established. But to be told it's merely symbolic. And its only actual purpose is to help us, inspire us to see behind it for what the true meaning is. So here's family, here's selfless love, here's passionate commitment, here's willingness, literally, willingness to give our lives for others in the form of children, spouse, parents. But what we're supposed to understand is that others are the same as us. And we find it easier. God gives us an arena in which it was easier, just as He gave me my friend that I spontaneously and easily have loved my entire life. Circumstances caused us to live separately for the last, after 10 years. But that has never changed, the commitment of the heart. And I did learn. I learned how much you could love someone and how joyous it is to do that. And then I learned about work as service because I wanted to serve. And of course, in my own life, Swamiji invited me to serve him directly. For a period of time, for several years, that was the whole context of my work, was directly serving him. Then he gradually diminished the proportions. But I always had the opportunity to work at least somewhat in direct service to him. Increasingly less as years went on, because I learned the lesson well. And so for Swamiji, I would always do it. And he took advantage of that, because my willingness there taught me how much fun it was to give. And I knew it to a certain extent, but not to that extent. Here's an exact example of how that worked. Now, because I, didn't have a family, I didn't have children, Swamiji was the focal point of that kind of spontaneous selflessness that family gives to most people. And that eventually we can learn to express directly to God through any representative in front of us, meaning anything at all, whatever it might be. But I don't think I'm quite going to get to finish that thought. But there was a period of time when Swami Kriyananda gave Sunday service at our temple there at Ananda village. This was in the 70s. This would have been 71, 72, 73, when I was in charge of the kitchen, and the temple was at what is now the meditation retreat. And the pattern was the whole community would come to Sunday service. The kitchen, I would prepare lunch for everyone. We would all have lunch together. Swamiji would have lunch with everyone. The numbers were 50 or 60 people. We were not a large group at that time. And Swamiji started giving Sunday service every other Sunday because he was bringing Jyotish and Jaya and Binay and others into the role of ministry and allowing them to learn. So on the Sundays that Swami was coming and was going to give service, I would make the very best meals that I could make. And I was not a very good cook, but at least I applied myself with as much talent and creativity as I could. On the Sundays when Swami was not conducting the service and would not be at lunch, I would just put on the table anything that happened to be around. You know, I would be sort of last minute about it. It wasn't that I put garbage on the table, but the difference was dramatic. And I did that for a number of months, just thinking it was an appropriate use of resources, my resources. But one day I began to ask myself the question, the first question that occurred to me is, would Swami really approve of this? Because his attitude was that everything he did was to serve Master. And he never said, oh, this is good enough. Everything that he approached, for all the years that I knew him, no matter what it was, he concentrated on it completely and did it the best that it could be done. I mean, within appropriate parameters, of course. I mean, we have to put in some common sense. But he never thought, oh, it's just Jaya, oh, it's just Jyotish. It doesn't need to be that good. Because for Swami, we were all representations of God, and we were all loved equally. And two things sort of came to light for me. The first one was that Swami himself would not approve. He wouldn't say, oh, that's right, I'm here, you should make a great lunch. It was, you're serving, Asha. Why are you serving with your full heart sometimes and half your heart the rest of the time? It means that he didn't, because it was him, it didn't justify it. He knew that for him I was motivated. But that was my lack, that I wasn't motivated all the time. I was seeing Swami incorrectly. If I was thinking only when I served his body was I serving him. And I also realized, of course, that I had lots of fun, you know, planning really nice lunches and doing everything I could to make them good. Because it was like, these were my brothers and sisters. And these brothers and sisters were all there to serve God, and I had the extraordinary privilege of serving them. And then, of course, once you start that, where do you cut that? Who is not a representative of God? Who is not on this planet doing their best to be in tune with God, no matter how backward they may be in that effort? You know, when am I not serving God? And why would I then not want to do it as well as I could? See, the purpose of this is very simple. It's the fundamental purpose of the spiritual path, to increase happiness and reduce suffering. And if in everything I do, I can awaken myself to the fact that it is always God and Guru in front of me, and it is always to them, to him, that I am giving, then my heart is always open. The joy and the energy is always flowing. And this is the secret to increasing happiness and reducing suffering. God bless you, my friends.